Good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you all, both those that are present here and also those that are following us virtually. My name is Virgilio Viana. I am the Director General of Foundation for Amazon Sustainability. And it's my great pleasure to moderate this panel. We have one member who is on his way. People here at the COP always get lost. So it's part of the business. Just like events online, there are always problems with events online, right? So that's how it goes. But it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to discuss how REDD Plus in the Amazon can be a mechanism to fund development. And here we're going to have an opportunity of hearing from the private sector. We have Plinio and Laura, who represent different private companies that work with the carbon through REDD projects in Brazil and other parts of the world. And we're going to also have the opportunity of hearing from a governmental representative, Secretary Mauro. Is the Secretary of Environment for the state of Pará and also a member of GCF, the Task Force of Governors on Climate, which is a co-host of this event. And we're going to have also the views of a Congressman, Marcelo Ramos, who is on his way. And I'd just like to start with Plinio and ask you, Plinio, from a private sector perspective, how do you see REDD as a possible source of funding for development of the Amazon?
Thank you, Virgilio. Thanks for the invitation. Before I answer, let me just take a step back and say that we've been working with this mechanism for 12, 13 years now. And my understanding is that what I like to call the business environment for this kind of investment is truly maturing now in Brazil. As you know, I mean, we spent many, many years first discussing, first what was REDD all about, then was there any room for private investment within REDD? And unfortunately, there was a vision that was put forward by many organizations, environmental organizations including, that pretty much said that there was no room for private investment in REDD in Brazil. Even from the federal government perspective, many years ago, there was great barriers almost to impede investment from the private sector in the Amazon. But all of those themes have been maturing a lot in the past 5, 6 years now. And I now realize that there is a much better business environment for investment in the Amazon through REDD. And I will example that. First, there is great support from the governors, from the state, from the Amazonian states. So now we have projects in Amapá, Rondônia, Pará, Amazonas. And in all of those states you go now, people are really supportive in terms of opening the doors for this type of investment. That wasn't the reality many years ago. Second, there is not much discussions anymore about methodologies. We went through many years of developing methodologies and trying to put together very robust baselines and robust and high-quality projects in order to demonstrate that those projects, if they have the right scale, they can be part of the solution to combat deforestation and degradation. And third, but not last, there has always been, it has always also matured is the private sector, the corporate private sector, so the demand side for this type of credits. And that's kind of new in Brazil. Of course, the international market has always been there. If I look back and see all the credits I've sold in all those years, I can say that, I don't know, 75, 80%, maybe more, has always been sold abroad. So to international brokers or international companies, commercial partners. And this is changing year by year now. I think by the end of the year, when we close our sales, we will probably be around 55 to 60% abroad and almost 40% selling to Brazilian corporates. And this is very, very important because when you have Brazilian corporates, Brazilian companies, first understanding the impact they have when they purchase those type of credits, the impact they have when they support those projects, you always start changing the political landscape and the political support for REDD, because those companies have a much more advocacy power when it comes to what are the scenarios that those companies want in order for them to follow their net zero strategies. Mm-hmm. So to conclude this initial conversation, I would say that we have a much better business environment now, and this is why we are seeing a huge interest from the international community, from investors, to invest money in conservation, restoration, and other type of conservation projects, REDD Plus projects in the Amazon.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And I'll just highlight 3 points that you've mentioned about this new moment that you see for the private sector in REDD in Brazil. First, a positive view by the federal government. Yes. Second, support from Amazon states. And third, domestic demand for credits. Yes. Fazendo uma mini tradução aqui, porque eu acho que vocês não estão tendo tradução, né, Marcelo? Nem você, nem o Mauro, né? O Luiz está para apoiar aí, mas eu vou só fazer o 3 pontos. Não sei se você quiser fazer talvez ao lado, Luiz, daí você botar a cadeira no meio dos dois, que talvez seja mais eficiente. É para fazer de pé de ouvido. Entende? Então tá beleza. Então o ponto fundamental são 3 pontos positivos que o Marcelo ou que o Plínio vê. Uma visão do governo federal a favor de mercado, apoio dos governos estaduais e uma demanda doméstica, demanda nacional por crédito. So that's very interesting, and I share the view of Plínio that this is a new historic moment for Brazil. Those of us who have been following this issue for many years, and in my case since 2005, I think it's a very different moment that we see in Brazil. So let me turn it over to Laura, who also represents a private sector perspective. So what's your take, Laura?
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity, Virgilio, and we are very happy to be here. But just to add a little bit on the question, maybe a fourth topic from what Plínio brought. The slide that's just here for you is a study from the International Chamber of Commerce and Weigh Carbon, where we looking at everything that is happening in Brazil now in different spheres, like in the legal and Congress, also in the federal government and among the private sector. We understood that was a real lack of knowledge of what we are talking about when we are talking about carbon markets for Brazil. So the first goal of this study was to make the message more homogeneous among all the different parts of the stakeholders that get into a carbon project in Brazil. So just adding a bit, the private sector within the ICC made this ask, so we could so that all the parts in Brazil could talk at the same language. So just to add a little bit on that in terms of opportunities. And then in terms of what we recommend in the end and what we look at that is very key, so that everybody talks the same language and that we can not only bring benefits to the private sector but also for the country, is the necessity that we have for a specific monitoring, reporting, verification system that connects the states, the cities, the private sector, so we can together look into the results of mitigation and connect these benefits with what we are hearing here at COP regarding Article 6. So this is a huge opportunity for Brazil. And into the study, we looked how relevant is the forest sector for the economy. So when we look to the different sectors within our NDC, so industry, transportation, energy, forest, and agriculture. It's not questionable how the sectors that are directly connected to the nature, energy, agriculture, and forestry, they have an expressive way of helping the industry and the transport to reach their goals in terms of net zero and demanding the carbon offsets for that. So just wrapping a little bit in terms of what we saw for these three sectors and what we saw during the study is that when we look to the demand side of who is going to be demanding carbon credits from Brazil in terms of the voluntary carbon market, we saw all the commitments from net zero commitments from private sector around the world. So when we look into the numbers, we were around 30% of being the supplier of this global commitments. And when we look into the regulated carbon market in terms of Article 6, and then understanding Article 6 as bilateral contracts that Brazil could have with European countries, the US, Japan, and countries that will demand carbon credits, we got into a number that it's up from 2 to 22% of being able to supply those credits. And those credits would come from projects basically connected to the nature, so forest and agriculture. This was quite clear, and we are here spreading a little bit of this message and also reinforcing the importance to have the monitoring, reporting, and verification nationally, so we can have a transparent traceability and traceability of everything that we can do in our country. So I would maybe stop here.
Well, that's excellent, Laura. Let me just highlight the importance of a point that you've made about the connection between jurisdictional and project level. And this may be an issue that we want to pick up questions from the floor also, because this is, I think, an area where there are very interesting new developments in that regard as well. There is a commission in Brazil called CONAREDD that has allocated credits to states, and the issue is how to relate those credits at the state level to project level. And the study that you've mentioned, I think it's available, right?
Yes,
on your website.
the QR code was just...
Okay, so people can look it up. She just made a summary, and it looks very interesting. I myself have not read it yet, but I'm looking forward to studying it. And about MRV, it's very important to have the concept of integrity very clear, so that whatever is done is not, there's no leakage and so on. Marcelo, a Laura e o Plínio deram uma perspectiva muito positiva aí com relação ao mercado de carbono, tanto pela demanda internacional, que esse estudo que a Laura mencionou, quanto a demanda doméstica, também que o estudo dela e a percepção do Plínio é que já existe um ambiente muito favorável para isso. Então, nós gostaríamos de ver, ouvir você, da sua perspectiva como um legislador, qual que é a sua visão sobre esse tema. So I'm just asking Marcelo about his perspective as a congressman on how he sees the growth of the demand in the domestic market, in the international market, and how the Congress is seeing this. And so we're going to hear you, Marcelo. So the floor is yours. E se você puder falar devagar, acho que o Luiz Vilares vai fazer a tradução, é isso, né, Gabi? Então fala umas frasezinhas e dá uma paradinha para
tudo bem.
o
Eu
Luiz.
até optei por
Luiz que é
fazer
tradutor amador, então, so let's see how it goes.
Eu até optei por fazer algo escrito aí, que permite de uma forma mais fácil. Então, primeiro, agradecer a oportunidade do diálogo tão importante. Eu que sou um deputado do estado do Amazonas, portanto, um deputado de dentro da Amazônia.
So the Deputy Marcelo Ramos represents the state of Amazonas, and he says thank you to be here and the opportunity to bring his voice.
A economia de baixo carbono e o combate ao desmatamento não são mais escolhas para o Brasil.
The low carbon economy and the choice of stopping deforestation, they are no more other choices. This is the choice. This is the way to go.
Do ponto de vista, são imposições ambientais, climáticas e econômicas.
They're economical, environmental, and climate impositions.
Do ponto de vista ambiental, o Brasil não pode mais escolher entrar ou não nesse esforço global por equilíbrio climático.
From the environmental standpoint, Brazil cannot choose either to go or not to go into this climate change effort, climate combat change effort. It has to go.
Porque o que está em jogo é se teremos um planeta habitável.
So what's at stake is that we must be in an habitable planet, a place to live.
Do ponto de vista econômico, quem optar por uma produção de baixo carbono, de alto carbono, e quem insistir numa atividade empresarial fundada no desmatamento,
So from the economic standpoint, whoever chooses a carbon or fossil fuel-based operation or businesses that need deforestation will
deixará de ser competitivo por barreiras comerciais verdes e por uma consciência cada vez maior dos próprios consumidores.
they will be no longer competitive, and they will face lots of trade barriers and other sort of impositions that will ultimately drive them out of business.
Assim, é urgente ao Brasil regular o seu mercado de crédito de carbono para garantir segurança jurídica para esse mercado.
So that imposes us an urgency to regulate our carbon market and bring it to operation.
O projeto de lei 528 criava mecanismos de créditos a partir de ativos florestais.
So Project Law 528, it creates valuation mechanisms from forestry or nature assets.
E para a indústria e setor energético, criava um mecanismo de cap and trade.
And for the energy and industry sectors, mechanism of cap and trade mechanism.
No entanto, mesmo com todo o esforço do parlamento,
Nevertheless, with all the parliament efforts to make the law,
e com a inclusão na pauta da Câmara dos Deputados essa semana, o MMA impediu a votação.
and even that this project was at the chamber to be voted, the Environmental Ministry of Brazil just pulled it off.
A medida atrasa a inserção do Brasil nesse mercado,
So this measure would bring Brazil into the carbon market.
dificulta a nossa inclusão em acordos internacionais
Actually, rephrasing, without this project, Brazil is not going to be into the carbon market, and it's going to impose difficulties for commercial trade.
e nos retira um potencial econômico enorme para a geração de riqueza e combate à pobreza, principalmente das populações tradicionais da Amazônia.
And it also imposes more difficulties for us to reach the economy for the poor people, so bringing resources to poor people, even more in the forest. So without this project, the difficulties are going to be much bigger.
Muito obrigado, Marcelo. Eu acho que muito clara a sua visão de que o Brasil não tem escolha, né? E eu acho que o mundo não tem escolha, todos nós. Eu acredito que o próprio acordo China e Estados Unidos tenha sido muito emblemático nesse sentido. Países que têm outras diferenças na questão do clima, temos que estar todos juntos, né? E aí o desafio do projeto de lei. Oh, I'm sorry, I started with the Portuguese. Picking on a point that Deputy Marcelo mentioned, I think it's a key point is the fact that Brazil doesn't have a choice, and I just mentioned that no one has a choice, right? We have to go into the climate agenda as quickly and and as powerful as we can. So I think it's important because Congressman Marcelo is Vice President of the Brazilian lower house, the Câmara dos Deputados. And then he mentioned an unfortunate event that the legislation which was about to vote this week was not supported by the government. But I think this is not the end of the game. This is going to continue. This is how politics work. Marcelo knows it better than all of us. But I think the message that comes back, Marcelo, is that it's even more important now than it was before, right, to have this piece of legislation approved. Now we're going to have a perspective from a state. Mauro represents the state of Pará and is an expert in legislation. He's a lawyer himself and was an advisor to the Minister of Environment on legal issues for many years before becoming a secretary. So, Mauro, it's great to have your perspective on this. Please.
Thank you, Virgilio. Thank you all. You allow me to speak in Portuguese to be more fluent to everyone. Bem, nessa questão de crédito de carbono, do mercado de carbono, eu queria separar rapidamente a minha fala em 3 pontos: o passado, o presente e o futuro.
Well, excuse me. In this carbon markets or carbon issues, we have. I will make my voice in 3 stages: past, present, and future.
O Brasil fez um esforço muito grande com contribuições voluntárias de redução de gases de efeito estufa e redução de desmatamento através da Política Nacional de Mudanças do Clima.
Brazil has made a long stride and a very strong effort to decrease its carbon output through the Climate National Policy.
Num período de pouco mais de uma década, o Brasil criou diversas áreas protegidas e diminuiu o desmatamento sensivelmente. Só para você ter uma ideia.
In about a decade, Brazil has reduced deforestation and actually created many reserves, forest reserves in Brazil.
Então, só o Pará tem 21 milhões de hectares de áreas protegidas estaduais e, somadas às áreas protegidas federais e estaduais, cerca de 58 milhões de hectares, o que dá quase 60% do seu território de áreas protegidas.
The state of Pará has 21 million state protected areas, and together with federal areas, it makes 58 million hectares, and those together, they make about 50% of the whole state area.
Em paralelo...
60, I'm sorry. Thank you.
60 ou 70. Em paralelo a isso, houve uma redução de desmatamento até 2012 expressiva, seja no estado do Pará, seja na Amazônia como um todo.
We have observed a strong deforestation rate until 2012 in the state of Pará and the whole Amazon.
Com a ausência de um mercado regulado, oficial, esses créditos não foram contabilizados. E isso faz com que a gente já tenha um crédito que precisa ser contabilizado num futuro mercado regulado.
Without a regulated market, those credits until 2012 they could not have been accounted. So it urges us to have the accounting for the next periods.
No momento agora que há um repique de aumento de desmatamento, nós precisamos proteger essas áreas já criadas e fazer aquilo que nós já estamos fazendo no estado do Pará e no âmbito do consórcio.
At the moment we see the deforestation rising again, we have to reinforce those policies and make them happen actually in the state of Pará and the other areas.
Que é a revisão dos nossos planos de combate ao desmatamento e alternativas, os chamados PPCADs.
So it's the review of our deforestation combat plans.
E a elaboração de planos setoriais estaduais e também um plano regional que inclua, além do combate ao desmatamento, a a restauração produtiva, a infraestrutura verde e as capacidades de cada um dos estados.
So, and that comes together with infrastructure and all integrated plans that joins the deforestation combat plans all together.
Por isso, nós precisamos, no presente, para alcançarmos o futuro, de que haja um reforço das estruturas de apoio aos estados subnacionais do Brasil.
Approval of the statement of Article 6.4 in this scope, then the states have already their plans already devised for those credits, and then we have to make them effective under 6.4.
A gente, em dados momentos, a gente se preocupa com a organização macro, mas se esquece que os estados, seja da Amazônia brasileira, seja da Indonésia, ou seja da África, todos aqueles que têm florestas tropicais, precisam de aumentar ou reforçar as suas institucionalidades.
So we were worried about ourselves in our states, but the whole institutionalization, the whole issue that goes beyond Brazil, goes to all forest areas in the world, they must be together.
E em alguns países, como o Brasil, nós temos uma outra estrutura federativa que chamam municípios. E esses também precisam ser reforçados para que nós alcancemos as metas que estamos preconizando no âmbito nacional.
So to add more complexity, we have to engage the municipalities, the cities and their municipalities into this plan, because they also have a part that has to be into the project.
O Estado do Pará, dentro do contexto do consórcio nacional, tem procurado ser uma liderança natural por conta do nível de desmatamento que ainda alcança.
So the state of Pará has a natural leadership for its size and also for the challenge ahead.
Fazendo que o Plano Amazônia Agora, um plano de redução de gases de efeito estufa e desenvolvimento sustentável, recentemente lançado.
So making that could you just put it
Amazônia Agora, the plan,
Amazon
Now Plan.
Amazon Now Plan is restated and operable.
E uma bioeconomia restaurativa baseada também em regeneração florestal, de alcance de metas de restauração.
And then that bioeconomy based on restoration and valuation of nature
Que seja inspiradora para todos os outros estados da Amazônia.
becomes a strong inspiration for the other Amazon states.
Portanto, o caminho para a Amazônia Legal brasileira está dado.
So the way for the Brazilian Amazon is given.
No âmbito regional, o Plano de Recuperação Verde.
So in the regional scope, the Green Recovery Plan.
E no âmbito individual de cada estado, o exemplo, o Plano Amazônia Agora, que instituímos no estado do Pará.
And at the state level, the Amazon Now Plan, like we have done at Pará.
Mas insisto e reforço, são necessários apoios antecipatórios para que a gente alcance as nossas metas.
But we insist upon the setting of regulatory plans that give us the way to go.
Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Mauro. Thank you, Mauro. And I'd like to highlight a point that you emphasized throughout your speech, which is the need to create value for the past. Pará has reduced deforestation quite significantly until 2012, as you said, and now needs funding to implement the Plano Amazônia Agora, the Amazon Now plan. So I think this is an issue that it's in the corridors of COP, a number of discussions around this, how to create value, to compensate for historical emission reductions of states, and how this could leverage funds so that states such as Pará can have the resources to meet their own goals. And this applies to other states. And also another point that Mauro mentioned that is very relevant to share is that all Brazilian states have come together and they've created a consortium. It's called Consórcio Interestadual, né, dos Governos da Amazônia. It's an interstate entity that has a formal nature, and they have put together a plan which is called Plano de Recuperação Verde, a green recovery plan that has a number of points, but it also deals with the carbon issue and climate agenda. So thank you so much, Mauro. And on this note, let me open to the floor. We can have both questions from the floor and also from the audience virtually. So if you could just raise your hands, and then I will try to have an order. I will ask three things. First, that you say your name. Oh, first of all, that you stand up and go to the microphone. Second, that you say your name and your institution. And third, that you be brief, extremely brief and direct in your question. Please.
Thank you very much. My name is Ina Porras, and I work with the United Kingdom Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. So last week, we heard the announcement of this LEAF program. So it's $1 billion that it's being mobilized to really push and promote the private sector participation in carbon offsets. So I can't quite remember if Brazil is signing into this, but Colombia, Costa Rica has been, Uganda, I believe. So there is already several countries that have been engaging in this. How do you see this initiative, LEAF, in relation to all the work that has been going on for many years with REDD+ in the Amazon? Is this an opportunity? Does it help or not? So how would you see the way forward as well with this type of initiatives? The interesting point of that is that floor price of $10 a ton. How do you see that price as well? Thank you.
So I think a pergunta sobre o tema do LEAF, né, que é essa iniciativa que envolve a Grã-Bretanha, a Noruega, Estados Unidos e 19 empresas, que foi lançado aqui com essa meta de $1 bilhão. So let me ask you to give a quick round of response, but very quick. So start with Plínio, and then we'll just go following the same sequence.
So Brazil as a country hasn't signed, but there are many states in the Amazon who had put proposals for LEAF. If I'm not wrong, all of the states in the Amazon, Mauro can correct me. We, in Brazil, the project developers have formed an alliance called Nature-Based Solutions Alliance. So all of the companies that are working and investing in REDD+ are in these institutions, and we wrote a position paper about LEAF, recognizing the importance of it. Everything is, of course, welcome when it comes to resources and mobilization, but there are still some issues remaining to be solved in terms of how we reconciliate the baselines, how we're gonna, do what we call in technical terms the nesting between the project level, the state baselines and projects. So they haven't yet come with a proposal on that, and I think that without it, we're gonna have, instead of things helping, we're gonna have a conflict that shouldn't be there in the first place.
Okay.
And there is an agenda to make this happen, but it hasn't yet.
All right, very, very good. Laura.
Okay, I can quickly comment. As far as I understood from the LEAF program, it has a role of making a call for the private sector to invest and make the fund, so this is quite important. And the second one to be like a match from demand and supply. So as far as the issues can be addressed in connecting who needs and how the money is going to be applied in the time frame that the program established, I think it's quite positive.
Okay, Marcelo.
Eu serei bastante pontual. Primeiro que, para nós da Amazônia, é fundamental projetos de mercado voluntário, a partir de ativos baseados na natureza.
For us, from the Amazon, it's very important to have the valuation of nature-based assets, markets that trade this.
Nós ainda temos muitas discussões sobre as metodologias de reconhecimento desse crédito e acho que deveríamos aprofundar os nossos esforços nisso.
But we have many opinions about the methodologies under these standards. So we have to go deep into this understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Bem, o Pará foi um dos primeiros a anunciar que ia aderir à plataforma LEAF.
So Pará has been one of the first to make it public that they will go with the LEAF platform.
Porém, os alvos, os objetivos do LEAF têm elevada ordem de grandeza e de dificuldades.
However, the LEAF objectives have high difficulties, high levels of
No mesmo
achievement.
sentido que eu falei de antecipações aqui em relação ao mercado de carbono, também falamos em relação ao LEAF, que tem a natureza da sua iniciativa com pagamento por resultados.
So the same token that we have spoken about the achievement of past carbon credits, the LEAF also brings this issue.
Nós entendemos que o LEAF é uma iniciativa, mas não é a panaceia das iniciativas.
Okay, we understand that LEAF is an initiative, is worth, but it's not the solution for everything.
Nós precisamos que haja a utilização desse ecossistema de fundos, aí incluído o GCF, o Green Climate Fund. Aí eu falo especificamente sobre o Green Climate Fund.
So into this solution, the Green Climate Fund has to be into the scope.
Ele precisa ser destravado, o Green Climate Fund.
The Green Climate Fund must be operating.
Além disso,
Unlocked. Excuse me.
além disso, seja no consórcio, seja no âmbito dos estados, o consórcio, por meio do FUNBIL, que tem uma entidade receptora de recursos e executora de projetos, que é o FUNBIL.
At the state level, for instance, the FUNBIL is the vehicle that has to be into the solution as well.
E por mera coincidência, também é o FUNBIL, que é a entidade executora do Fundo da Amazônia Oriental, em que o Pará selecionou num processo seletivo amplo, público e transparente.
So by coincidence, FUNBIL is also the financial entity that is in the West Amazon Fund, brought by Pará.
Portanto, além do LEAF, nós precisamos entender que volto a insistir, um ecossistema de fundos que precisam ser utilizados entre as iniciativas privadas e os governos públicos, ou os governos, para que a gente possa alcançar as metas. As metas são ambiciosas, audaciosas e difíceis de serem alcançadas. Vou só complementar para que a gente não se sinta frustrado, e eu tenho ouvido que lá no auditório de negociação central já se fala em adiamento de metas para 2060, daquilo que já estava preconizado para 2050. Eu acho que se a gente não utilizar todas as ferramentas que nós temos, nós podemos frustrar, não só nós mesmos, mas que todos que esperam de governos e de iniciativas privadas o alcance de metas de redução de gases de efeito estufa.
So beyond LEAF, actually under the LEAF scope, other funds must be included. This is beyond the LEAF itself. So that is an imposition that must happen in order for all the states to implement their plans. And this is related actually to a urgent call to stay to the 2030, 2050 targets that recently has just been mentioned in this in the area here. That is, it could go now to 2060, and so the solutions that are too much into just one scope that does not bring all the other participants, they will not help for these very emergent targets.
Okay, Ina, I think you had a very diverse set of answers to your question. I think it's a very important one because LEAF, as you all know, is a very relevant new initiative that has a big ambition. And I think the answer began with Plinius saying that it's a potentially positive initiative, but it has some challenges. And there is also a position paper that I suggest you guys look it up. I imagine Biofílica's website can have that, so people can look it up. The problem of reconciling baselines and nesting, how the jurisdictional approach can be embedded into the LEAF. Laura mentioned that it's generally positive, and the same with Marcelo Ramos saying that it's important to have all initiatives on board. And Mato mentioned in a similar way that Pará was the first to support LEAF, but doesn't see LEAF as a panacea. No? LEAF is just one of the mechanisms, and Pará state and other states are seeing an ecosystem of different initiatives, and you've singled out the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, as being a target to be unlocked, destravado, as we say in Portuguese. And mentioned also that the consortium of Amazon states has created a mechanism through Fumbio, and Fumbio is also the manager of the Fund of Pará. And let me share with you, after making this very quick summary, with you my perspective. I think LEAF is, as has been said by my colleagues here on this panel, is positive. It's funding. It's bringing together countries, 3 different countries, several companies. But there is a but. We still need to work out how this is going to relate to project level and how states are going to have a nested approach. I see a way forward. I think it's possible to combine art trees, validation and verification at the state level with a VERA system, VCS, to nest projects within that. So I think it's a possible solution, but this still needs work, right? I think we have to work on this to make it happen, because I think it's important to reconcile these different layers of management, of finance, and of stakeholders. But I think that is the challenge that I see, having heard from my colleagues as well, different perspectives. The federal government of Brazil has not formally made any remark, but in general, what I've heard is that the federal government of Brazil still has some doubts about LEAF as well. So I think there is a need of negotiation in that regard as well. Most states have engaged. Pará was the first, as Mauro mentioned. Some states were reluctant to engage in LEAF because given the baseline of art trees, there is no credit. But at the end of the day, all of them made a proposal, but the proposal is a non-binding proposal. It's just a sort of a letter of interest to participate in the discussion. So I think there is going to be a lot of negotiation and discussions in the months to come. So let me open the floor once again. We still have 25 minutes, if I'm not mistaken. So we have time for questions. And if I don't have any from the floor so far, feel free to raise your hands, and I will give you the opportunity. 1, 2, 3. If not, let me ask you a question. Let me go invite you to go a little bit deeper on the issue of how to nest projects that are certified by the VCS system, which is the largest system currently, with the art trees. How do you see, Plinio, this happening? What are the hurdles, the difficulties that you see, and what are the ways forward?
Well, first we have to remember that a lot of work has been put in this agenda, not because of LEAF, not because of art trees, but because of these discussions on projects or jurisdiction or federal numbers and baselines. I mean, we've been discussing this for how many years? Usually 15 years now. And of course, it's an issue, right? And it's an evolving issue because, unfortunately, when we started discussing, deforestation was going down, and then projects were being criticized because deforestation is going down, so why do you need projects? And then now deforestation is going up, and then hopefully deforestation will go down again sooner. So it's an evolving issue. So I think the most important thing is what is the governance where we discuss those things. Because we can't have a foreigner program telling us what to do in terms of baselines. I mean, we have to figure that by ourselves, right? We have very smart people, people from the region involved in this, and this has to come from us. I think that's the main message. Second, everybody is involved in, when deforestation goes down, it's not an effort, a lone effort. Deforestation goes down for various institutions, for various means, and so there is private investments involvement, there is federal government, there is command and control. In fact, if you look the rates when they went down, as Mato said, from 2004 to 2012, 13, a lot of it had to do with command and control activities. So we had the moment with very well-established command and control activities, but we didn't have the incentive issues implemented. Now we are discussing a lot, and there's a lot going on in terms of incentives, but we are losing the command and control agenda. I think when we conciliate those things, we will have much better ability to control deforestation. And so I think governance is the first one. Brazil has what's called CONA-REDD. So there is a national commission on REDD. States are part. Private sector still don't have a seat in there. That's something that we've been demanding for many years now, and we still don't have. But there is a body there that it has to be in that body, because that's a well-established, and CONA-REDD is actually part of the convention, of the climate convention. So I think that's the way, that's the place to discuss. And Virgilio mentioned Vera and its program GNR, I think it's called, and they will soon release, according to them, new methodologies on how to conciliate those methodologies. So we have smart people. I mean, everybody's involved, and everybody's interested that this happens, because from a project perspective, I don't want to be criticized because I'm using a baseline that is not connected to reality. I want to do things realistic. So if this project is really additional, I want to have credits, and if I'm able to manage the area, I want to have credits connected to this effort I'm putting on the ground and those investments I'm putting on the ground.
Muito bom. Então, o ponto é esse, de como conectar o nível de referência dos estados com os projetos. Queria pular e ouvir do Mauro a perspectiva. Qual que é a sua perspectiva, Mauro, sobre esse aninhamento, né, que é o Nested, é o aninhamento de projetos dentro das metas estaduais e dentro do sistema de rede de vocês? Asking Mauro what's his perspective on the nesting approach that Plinio just elaborated.
Talvez já prevendo esse tipo de questionamento, eu falei aqui do que nós já temos de unidades protegidas, áreas protegidas, e do esforço que nós fizemos de conservação no Pará e na Amazônia.
Just foreseeing this point, I have mentioned about the size and the number of reserve areas or preservation areas we have in the state of Pará.
Uma das perguntas que nós tivemos que responder ao LIF sobre para que pudéssemos aderir era a quantidade de áreas verdes ou conservadas que nós tínhamos de nossa propriedade.
So in our engagement at LIF, we had to answer the question about the quantity, the areas of our state areas that we had in the Amazon, in the forests.
É lógico, se nós temos que apresentar alguma coisa que nós já temos em um nível alto de exigência, evidentemente que a gente quer alguma recompensa sobre isso.
Well, it's clear that if we are asked to present all the areas and all the work we have done already for them, we also want a reward for this.
Na esteira do que o Plínio falou, nós também temos, por isso que eu digo que o LIF é um instrumento. Nós temos o nosso instrumento nacional, que é a CONARED.
So that based on what Plínio has said and what I've been saying about LIF, LIF is one instrument, but we have the national instrument, which is the CONARED.
E, muito embora nós hoje em dia tenhamos problemas de relacionamento internacional entre o governo central e outras partes,
so even that we internationally now have a relationship issue between the government of Brazil and the world,
nós devemos reforçar as institucionalidades que nós já temos consolidadas, e uma delas é a CONARED.
We must report the already established institutionalities that we have, and they are secure, and among them, it's CONARED.
Seja porque nós conseguimos alcançar reduções de emissão com a CONARED,
That's actually because we have achieved reductions, so we are able,
ou com os critérios da CONARED,
with the CONARED criteria,
seja porque agora aparece uma criterização mais elevada do ART3 do que em relação à CONARED.
and so that because actually there is a upper scale demand coming from ARCH3 comparing to CONARED.
Em resumo, nós poderíamos alcançar metas, como alcançamos metas ambiciosas, com o que nós já tínhamos de institucionalidade.
So, summarizing, we could achieve our targets like we have already done with the present institutionalities.
Mas com as novas criterizações advindas da plataforma ART3, nós temos que nos preparar para alcançar as metas que lá estão preconizadas.
But with the new criteria, the new ARCH-T criteria, we have to prepare ourselves for this new demand.
E me permitam ser chato. Nós precisamos antecipar suportes, sejam eles financeiros, de recursos humanos e até treinamentos, para que nós possamos alcançar as metas que o LIF preconiza.
So allow me to be tough on this, but we have to pull the financial help, the financial concept, financial demand for all this to happen. So the funds must come before.
Okay.
É isso.
Muito bom, muito bom. So, as you've stressed before, I think the need of support to meet the targets is really a key point for states, and I think that this is very clear. And also your view that LEAF, and this goes back to Ina's question, is not a silver bullet, is one mechanism and you have others. And the fact that CONARED, which is the national body that regulates REDD in Brazil, has already set allocations, and that speaks to your point about vintage credits. CONARED has already made an allocation. It's 50% stock and 50% flow, and 60% of all the emission reductions have gone to state governments, according to the stock and flow formula, and 40% to the federal government. So the states, in a way, they have already a legal mandate to negotiate these vintage credits. And I know that Tocantins state, which is a relatively smaller state, already has created a mechanism to account for and to market those vintage credits. Deixa eu agora ir caminhando para fechamento. Eu vi o deputado Marcelo Ramos nessas questões aí que estão surgindo sobre como relacionar diferentes esferas, porque uma coisa é a redução na esfera do Estado, que o CONARED já definiu que tem determinadas proporções. E como relacionar dentro dessa redução estadual os projetos, né, que é o que o setor privado trabalha. Então, esse é um desafio. Então, na sua visão, obviamente é uma questão muito específica, muito técnica, mas do ponto de vista do trâmite legislativo, né, a sua visão é que, passado o Senado ou a Câmara, tem um debate no Senado. E um dos desafios que sempre nós debatemos é o quanto é matéria de lei e o quanto é que é matéria de regulamento, né? Para não engessar muito na lei e também para não atrasar muito o processo de debate. Qual que é a sua visão, que passado aí o processo na Câmara, no Senado vai ter oportunidade de um outro debate mais aprofundado sobre o PL, para que questões como essa possam ser discutidas? Oh, I'm sorry. The question is, what is his perspective on the next round of discussions after the approval of the bill at the Congress, at the lower house, and then it will have to go to the Senate? How issues like nesting and jurisdictional approach will be dealt in this debate, and the extent to which this is something that is a matter of law or regulations of the law.
Uma das coisas que foi objeto de muito debate durante a elaboração do projeto 528 foi a convicção que nós tínhamos de uma separação absoluta de mercado voluntário para mercado regulado.
One of the top issues that we have discussed in preparing this bill was the distinction of regulated and voluntary market.
Isso inclusive, foi objeto de confrontos de opiniões democráticas com o MMA.
And this was actually a strong discussion between the Environmental Ministry and all the issuers of opinions.
E nós conseguimos fazer prevalecer a tese de que quanto menos legislar sobre o mercado voluntário, melhor.
So the conclusions, the working conclusions was that the less regulation on voluntary markets, the better it would be.
Nós ainda temos divergências com o MMA em relação ao prazo para a instalação do mercado regulado. Nós achamos que deve ser até 2 anos após a lei. O MMA acha que deve ser após 2 anos, até 2 anos após a ratificação do caderno, acho que tecnicamente chama caderno, né?
Artigo 6.
Desculpa.
O artigo 6.
Não, da regulamentação do artigo 6.
Do caderno de normas.
Do caderno de normas do artigo 6.
So there is a
Livro de regras.
there is a difference in perspectives from the bill issuers, the Parliament, and the ministry, the Environment Ministry, about the time frame for the regulation to come. So the deputy thinks that it should be 2 years, but the Ministry of Environment understands that there must be the enaction of the norms, regulations of the Article 6, so that it can be put in place. That could be beyond 2 years.
E nós entendemos que o mercado regulado deve ser num sistema de cap and trade. O Ministério tem uma outra opinião e nós optamos por remeter a regulamentação da modelagem do mercado para norma infraconstitucional, para norma infralegal, para decreto.
So, in the parliament or from the law standpoint, in the bill, they think that there should be a cap and trade regulation, but the ministry does not see this way. So they are taking this off the bill so that it could go.
Retornando ao Brasil, nós vamos retornar os esforços pela aprovação na Câmara dos Deputados. Se o projeto que sair da Câmara não for o ideal, nós vamos fazer os esforços para regular no Senado da República.
Returning to Brazil, they will push that to be enacted and seek all the efforts from the Senate for this effort as well.
O principal é que nós temos plena convicção de que quanto mais você legisla sobre o mercado voluntário, menos voluntário ele passa a ser.
In all this, one strong point or conviction is that the more you regulate a voluntary market, the less it's going to be effective.
Excellent, excellent. Picking up on 2 points that Marcelo mentioned. First, the importance of not over-regulating, so that the voluntary market has the freedom to develop through time. And second, that a lot of the issues should be dealt not in the law itself, but rather in norms that are part of the legal structure of REDD. I think these are very important points. And also the fact that this is going to go to the Senate, and the Senate will also have a say in new opportunities to improve. I think these are important points. Let me turn to Laura. Laura, you've done a very deep study, and could you share with us some numbers in terms of the potentials that you have identified? And this is because Congressman Marcelo Ramos is going to go back to Brazil. And one thing that we were discussing is that the COP offers not only an opportunity to showcase what is happening in Brazil here, but also to bring a perspective from the international arena back to the debates in Congress. Então, Marcelo, pedindo para a Laura compartilhar alguns números que podem servir para apoiar o debate no Congresso brasileiro. Então, Laura, por favor.
No, definitely, but just before jumping into the number,
Right.
I'll just comment a little bit because I do think I can bring another perspective in terms of path into the pathways to channel resource for the sustainable development. And from the private sector perspective, one point that is very important is that we have been hearing a number of private commitments on compensation strategies and using REDD plus credits or reforestation credits to compensate its own emission. And one of the recommendations that we do is that the private sector establish long-term purchase orders for these carbon credits so that the investment can go through the whole cycle of the projects. The second one is that the regulated market and also the voluntary market, the global market, they can all coexist with success if they are transparent and if they have a nice monitoring framework. So this is quite accountable if we can work on that. And the third point would be that any new project regarding REDD Plus or reforestation, it must include the communities into the territory because we must include the socio-economic benefits from these projects into the accountability of the projects. So these three recommendations that I'm mentioning is things that the private sector has bundled together into the study. And when jumping now to the numbers and how Brazil can be this big supplier of and offer to the global market, to different countries, its carbon credits, we reached the number of 1 gigatons. So if we put 1 million tons of CO2 in different prices, if we reach a price that all the high-level commission reports states as the necessary one for the low-carbon transition, and we reach maybe $100 a ton, that's very ambitious, but it's what we need to really transform our economy in a structured way. We could have around $100 billion as revenues to our country, looking into the sectors that we prioritize, so forest, agriculture, and energy. So this would be maybe how I end the question with the final number.
Okay, excellent, excellent.
It's huge.
So here are the big numbers, depending on how optimistic you are with the market, but these are relevant numbers. And if we think at the lower end of the estimate at $5 a ton,
Yep.
It's relevant. If we look at what is today, around $10 is also quite relevant. But I'd like to conclude this session with a couple of thoughts. First is that it's important to know that there are a number of other activities that we haven't had the time to discuss here that are relevant. The Brazilian Development Bank, BNDES, has just launched a fund to support restoration. And this is something that is part of the picture. And there are other funds also coming along in terms of restoration. There is an initiative by the UNDP and Norway and the GCF, the Governor's Task Force on Climate, called Window B, and this is supporting states, and FAS will have the role of managing a small fund, relatively speaking. This is $2 million, but this is going to support a group of institutions to work together with the state governments to help design and help early implementation of readiness. There are a number of other things that have been announced at this COP. I'm not going to summarize them, but there are a number of initiatives that are quite promising. One thing that we have not mentioned, and we should just refer to, is the fact that the Amazon is not only part of the equation in terms of mitigation, but also it's important in terms of adaptation. The Amazon is already suffering from extreme climate events and is likely to continue to be even more important. So adaptation is an issue. And this goes back to a point that Mauro mentioned before, which is to use the compensation for historical emission reductions to fund adaptation. This year we have the most severe flood ever in the recorded history of the Amazon. Since 1906 that we have records of the river level, and we had never had this level as this year. So this has impacts on the poor, so there is a connection with social agenda as well. So adaptation is quite important. So we have to think of REDD not only as a financial mechanism to fund police and monitor and control, but also a mechanism to boost resilience in adaptation to climate change, because it is already happening. Of course, we cannot make a connection between one event and climate change, but we can make the connection between the frequency of extreme events and climate change. And the frequency is clearly increasing, so there is an important social aspect to REDD as well. So I myself, I see carbon credits as not only a vehicle to solve or to contribute to solving the climate equation, but also one that can also help solve the social injustice or the climate injustice, which is here ahead of us, right? So we have only 5 seconds to finish, so let me use the last seconds to thank Luis Villares, who is the CFO of FAS and has just started a new career as translator today. So congratulations. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.